Say it with me. Matchups, matchups, matchups. If you're not considering which defenses to target each and every week in fantasy football, well, you're just missing out. Whether you're playing season long, DFS, or even betting on the weekly action, understanding defensive weaknesses and how to target them gives you an edge and helps set you up for success each and every week. In these weekly videos, we're going to cover the top 5 defenses split up by position in terms of fantasy production surrendered. Not only is this data going to help you make better decisions, but it's going to help you set better lineups and win more at fantasy football. So let's just cut right into it. Welcome back, everybody, to No Huddle Fantasy Sports. If you enjoy these videos, please smash that like button. And if you haven't already, please also subscribe to the channel and share this video with anyone else that you know is into fantasy sports. So one of my favorite points of research each and every week, whether I'm setting lineups for season long or even DFS, is defensive points allowed by position. Basically, I want to understand which defenses are worse in the NFL, which defenses are giving up the most fantasy points per game. There are, of course, guys in the NFL that are matchup proof, but for everyone else, knowing which defenses give up the most points by position gives you an edge. If you're trying to decide between a couple of quarterbacks, you want to start the guy against the defense that gives up the most points against quarterbacks. And that's what we're focusing on here. All my research is typically done through roto-grinders in terms of defensive matchups. They have a really neat tool, NFL defense versus position tool. It's very simple to use. You can sort it by position. You can sort it by the DFS site you're playing on, by points given up. I don't typically like to plug other fantasy sites, but I do highly recommend the RotoGrinders defense versus position tool. It's a great tool, it's easy to use, and it's something I've continued to use over the last couple of years. Keep in mind, while we're looking through all of this, all the stats right now are based off 2018. As we get further into the NFL season this year, I will update the stats, but what we have to work with right now is based off last year. That being said, things could change. Defenses add players, subtract players. There's new coordinators. A lot of things can change in the offseason, but just consider what the data is based off of. And finally, I've set this video up to be pretty simple. If you look on the right-hand side of the screen right here, the first box is your defense. That's the defense we're going to be attacking for the position. After that, we list DK and FanDuel points per game. And finally, we'll be listing out the player that you should be considering to attack that particular defense. So with that, let's jump into the quarterback position for week 1. You can see here we have 5 defenses listed out. These are the 5 worst defenses in terms of fantasy points given up in 2018 at the quarterback position. You have Atlanta, Cincinnati, Tampa Bay, New Orleans, and the New York Jets. All of these teams quite literally got torched by quarterbacks in 2018. You can see here, number 1 is Atlanta. They couldn't defend a single quarterback in 2018, giving up nearly 22 DFS points per game. The guy they're facing this week, Kirk Cousins. I don't actually really like Kirk Cousins, although the matchup's great. He is simply now in a more run-heavy focused offense, and I actually like Minnesota's running back going into the week. Cincinnati, similar deal. Russell Wilson, great matchup, but a guy I'm just not going to really consider. Seattle is playing at home. They're huge favorites, and Seattle's another team that likes to run the ball. I just don't think there's too much upside for Russell Wilson, even though the matchup's great. Tampa Bay, on the other hand, is a matchup I will be looking to exploit. Jimmy Garoppolo and San Francisco are playing in Tampa in a game that's pretty much still a pick'em. In terms of fantasy points given up per game, Tampa Bay got gouged last year, 21 points per game on DFS sites. Unlike the first 2 guys I mentioned, I have no issue playing Jimmy G in San Francisco this week. Next one on the list, New Orleans. If you have Deshaun Watson in season long, you're playing him against New Orleans. But if you're playing DFS, this isn't really applicable, at least for the main slate. Deshaun Watson in New Orleans, they play in a primetime Monday night game, so you're not going to have Watson available on DFS main slates. Finally, we have the New York Jets here, the 5th team listed on our list. They take on Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills at home. I've talked about Josh Allen as a sleeper pick in season-long fantasy drafts. I do like Josh Allen. I've talked about him in season-long fantasy drafts. He's in a great matchup to start the season off, playing against one of the worst defenses in the NFL in 2018. The Jets are giving up 21 points per game on DFS sites right now. For running backs, a lot of these teams are reoccurring simply because they just have really bad defenses. Up first, we have Cincinnati, a team that simply could not stop the run in 2018. A great matchup for Seattle at home. I talked about Russell Wilson, them being 9.5 point favorites. This favors the run game. you have Chris Carson, a run-heavy offense, at home against a team that simply can't stop the run. Next up, Arizona. Arizona in a similar boat, gave up a gouging amount of points to running backs last season. They're playing Detroit. Kerryon Johnson, a running back I'm not too fond of, but certainly in a great matchup this week against Arizona. We also have Kansas City on the list here. Most people know their defense is not being that great in 2018. I don't see how it got much better this season. They're traveling on the road in Jacksonville this week. I do really like Fournette. If you're playing season-long or DFS, you're talking about Fournette at home against a team that gives up a ridiculous amount of points to the running back position. We also have Atlanta. Just like quarterbacks, Atlanta gives up a ton of points to the running back position. Dalvin Cook is in a Minnesota offense that I think wants to run the ball a lot more than last season. I look to this matchup, and Dalvin Cook in particular. Finally, we have the Los Angeles Chargers. They too were a top 5 matchup for running backs last year. I am down on Mac overall on the season due to Andrew Luck's situation, but do like him still, I think, a little bit this week in terms of fantasy production. The Chargers just didn't show much in 2018 in terms of stopping the run. I would suspect that Indy probably wants to focus a little more on the run now. They have a good offensive line, so I'm still okay with Mac in week 1. Moving on to wide receivers, top 5 defenses in terms of allowing production. New York Jets, New Orleans, Philadelphia, Tampa Bay, and Green Bay. A lot of these teams coincide with quarterbacks naturally. But number 1 on the list here of what defense to target, New York Jets, giving up 44 points on DraftKings and 36 points on average on FanDuel. The downside here is they play the Buffalo Bills, who, if you're talking about a receiving core, there's not a lot of options. There's still some uncertainty. But definitely Buffalo is a team in a good spot in terms of their receivers versus the Jets. New Orleans, again, we saw that on the quarterback list, giving up 43 points to wide receivers on DraftKings in 2018. FanDuel, you had nearly 36 points per game. Downside in DFS, you're talking about a primetime game not on the main slate. We have Philadelphia on the list, a team that really struggled against the pass last season. The matchup here, the targets you want are from Washington, similar to the Jets, probably in a worse spot than the Jets. I barely even know who these receivers are. But if you're looking for a team in a great matchup, the Washington Redskins receivers are in that matchup. Tampa Bay, we keep seeing them on this list in terms of a bad defense in general. 40 points last year on average per game for DraftKings to receivers, 33 points on FanDuel. We talked about San Francisco, their quarterback situation. Jimmy G's in a good spot. Well, with him, we also like the receivers here. Pettis, Goodwin, Samuel are some guys that come to mind. Throw in Kittle there, obviously a tight end, but a big part of that receiving game. And finally, Green Bay. This one's a little irrelevant because they played on Thursday night. We saw a pretty brutal game the other night on Thursday, but keep that in mind going forward. And lastly, we have tight ends. You can see here Kansas City, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Cleveland, and Oakland were the worst teams last year in defending the tight end position. Kansas City in particular, last season giving up the most points at the tight end position. They're playing Jacksonville. I don't particularly like this tight end situation for Jacksonville, but if you're looking for an upside type of matchup, Kansas City is that. Ernsberger is currently listed as the starting tight end for Jacksonville. Cincinnati, I do actually like this matchup. I talked about how much I like the run game, but if you're looking for a tight end, Disley, especially in DFS, in a great matchup versus Cincinnati, a team giving up the second most points to the tight end position in 2018. Indianapolis, another target here for me. Henry for the LA Chargers. Third most points given up last year to the tight end position. Indianapolis giving up 15 on DraftKings, 12 on FanDuel. I like Henry for the Chargers. Cleveland, fourth most points given up last year in terms of fantasy production to the tight end position. Actually, I think over the last couple of years, if you look, Cleveland continuously ranks as one of the best matchups for the tight end position, giving up a massive amount of touchdowns over the last 2, 3, maybe even 4 seasons. In any case, Delaney Walker, a big weapon for Mariota and the Titans. I like Walker. I like the matchup versus Cleveland. Finally, a team that's playing on Monday, so for DFS, this might be out of the question. Howerman, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, for Denver in a great matchup versus Oakland, who struggled to stop the tight end position last season. And so that wraps up week 1. I encourage you to use this data to set better lineups and find an edge in weekly fantasy football. If you enjoyed this style of video, please hit that like button below and leave me a comment with your favorite matchups going into week 1. As always, good luck, and I'll see you in the next video.